Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Monday, January 20th, MLK Day. PTF back with you in Brooklyn, but not in the bunker. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that icicles were beginning to form on the camera lens. So I am up here instead, basically at my kitchen table, the room we call the Brooklyn Salon. That is Perrin's room behind me that you can see if you're watching along on YouTube as we do a simulcast audio video version of the show. And yes, it was Perrin who put the googly eyes on my wedding picture there behind me. And I kind of thought it was funny, so I have not taken them off. But enough about me. Let's bring in today's guest man who's been helping me with recapping the last several weeks. He does a lot more than that, including daily write-ups for the New York circuit on inthemoneypodcast.com. He also did a plus show with me. And when you last heard his voice, it might have been giving out a $30 winner confidently on top. Welcome back, Nick Tammaro. How are things?
Pete, doing great. Glad to be with you. No googly eye picture for me behind me.
Tell me you made some hay with King Angelo the other day.
Yeah, it was a good find there. It was worked out on the trainer switch angle and $30. Pretty solid. I was 12-1 on the morning line. I thought he'd be a little less than that, but I think we're now at peak Antonio Arriaga, and so people are going to be on board now, especially with that big win. So it was good to see. Took advantage of a little bit of a bias, but you know what? We're allowed to take that sometimes.
I kind of blew it at missing the next race, but I did have some money on the nose. Hopefully you were able to maximize it in terms of what you were able to do for your bankroll.
You can always make more, right? But there was a little score.
I should have bet more. That's what you want to be saying after a race. That's for sure. Let's talk about some of the racing action from the weekend as we get into recapping. We'll go in reverse order because we had some stakes races on Sunday at Santa Anita. We don't have official figures yet, but Cavalieri, this filly that won the La Cañada out there, we were talking off air, Nick, and it seems like you believe that this one is going to earn a strong figure, this daughter of Nyquist for this one. Just the third career start. Pretty much just handled this field. There wasn't a lot of drama. Give me your thoughts on Cavalieri and what figure she may have earned in this spot.
Looks like it should be around a mid to upper 90s fig, if my estimations are right. And she looks good doing it. She took Alphabella's best shot. Really left the other pace setter well behind by the time they arrived at the finish. So, all in all, a pretty solid effort from Cavalieri, who is now 3 for 3. I believe was entered in La Brea and scratched, if I remember correctly. And I guess Baffert had an eye on this La Cañada in an effort to continue to keep her around 2 turns. Obviously, the Beholder Mile would seem to be the intermediate goal for her. Opportunities after that get a little thin in Southern California. You really have to travel if you're going to get grade 1 chances. I suppose she could be an apple blossom horse for him. So looking like another good addition to the older female ranks and a horse with some potential. You always worry when they make that first start without Lasix, right? Are they going to be a filly that doesn't or is not able to handle it? And I think Paul Matisse really shed some light on that in recent years when we put the new Lasix rules in place, that it seems like the female horses struggle with it a little bit more at times than the males, but that box is checked now. And while Alphabella is no Torpedo Anna, Cavalieri is taking care of whoever's been in her way so far. And you would have to think the future is pretty bright.
I did a little write-up on the pick 6 that I actually just threw up on the regular inthemoneypodcast.com website, and I decided to leave Alphabella off of tickets, mainly just because of the price. I didn't want to have too much of the market covered in a short field. But the other part of it was that the Sadler barn, uncharacteristically chilly, and I just, after watching a couple of his horses run good seconds over the weekend, I just feel like this is an unlucky one. I don't think there's, even though I used that to decent effect in putting together this ticket the other day, I think, more or less I got lucky. I don't think there's any signal in this. Just seems like one of those things happens in every sport. Sometimes the ball goes through the hoop. Sometimes it just misses. I got to figure Sadler's going to be back to his normal winning ways sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think the last meaningful race John Sadler won was the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile and beat me for money. So that's usually how it goes, right? But no, I think his barn's a little chilly. But early, this time of year can be tough. You're often kind of refurbing your stable, figuring out which 3-year-olds are going to be able to run that haven't, which 3-year-olds are any good. And so we'll certainly see Sadler get back to a little bit more of a normal win rate pretty soon, I would think.
Before we move on from Cavalieri, way too early to ask this question, but hey, it's a horse racing podcast in January. This is what we're gonna do. Potential player for a race like the Breeders' Cup Distaff? Yes or no?
I would have to say so. I mean, I don't really see why not. I don't think it's unfair to say, but the part of the reason why Torpedo Anna handled the distaff field so easily last year is because it wasn't very good. The older females, once Idiomatic got hurt, didn't have much depth whatsoever. So you have to wait and see really how Torpedo Anna comes back, and then see how some of the 4-year-olds really perform at that level. We'll get a better sense of then, of course, of how good the 3-year-old fillies are. And it does seem like Brad Cox has a number of very good ones as of right now, even with Immersive on the sideline. But yeah, you'd have to think the Cavalieri in one piece, it would be very tough. So she's obviously a filly that's not exactly made of iron. There's a reason why she's only made 3 starts as a newly turned 4-year-old. But if she can stay together, I don't see why not. I don't think January is too early to be talking about something like that.
I'm remembering now the setback, and this may have caused the La Brea miss, was a fever, which isn't great, but I'd rather them have a fever than have something physical that was nagging. Sure. So yeah, we're going to learn so much more about her. The Lasix point you made and her passing that test, very interesting. Big Lasix question coming up in the Pegasus this weekend. If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to have a whole separate video about that. If you're listening on wherever you get your podcast to the In the Money Players podcast, inthemoneypodcast.com, we'll be talking about that horse a little bit later in the show. How's that for a little teaser for what's to come? Before we move on, let's talk more about what was going on at Santa Anita on Sunday, and we'll go right to Tupi's performance down the hill in the La Cienega Stakes. Another very straightforward victory. Once again, how did this one look to you in an early glance at the clock? And what did you think of her in general? Pratt able to dictate on the front end, winning by 2 1/4 in the end.
Right. When Him would fly or scratch, that put Tupi in a really advantageous position pace-wise. And Flavian Pratt is going to win the Eclipse Award this year because he's good at taking advantage of what might be in his favor. And that was exactly what Tupi did. He commented afterwards in the interview on FanDuel TV that she really seemed to be comfortable down the hill. So played out that way. Pretty astute move by Graham Motion to send her out there. And would love to see some additional East Coast-based trainers do that, especially with turf sprinters that might enjoy a little bit more ground. And Tupi's turned into a nice little horse. I remembered her, at least early in her career, as a horse I made 20-1 in the the Jessamine at Keeneland, who went off like 7-2, and I had no idea why. Luckily, she didn't run well, but she turned out to be a pretty nice turf sprinter.
One to take out of it for me was Nadette. Didn't break well, came running at the end, was sort of against it flow-wise as well. This is the horse I think that runs pretty well down the hill and just hasn't gotten a setup yet. And I could see, under the right circumstances, maybe even reversing form with a runner like Tupi. Am I over-enthusiastic on her chances, or are you picking up what I'm laying down regarding Nadette?
No, I agree. I think she wants to go farther ultimately, but I love these cutbacks to the hill. You just need pace, and if somebody gets in there and can push it along a little bit, that'll undoubtedly help Nadette in the future.
Let's go and talk about Saturday. We'll start with our friends. We'll continue along with our friends at Santa Anita, talk a little Gulfstream, and then we'll get to the fairgrounds. First one that comes up on my little list here, looking at the Unusual Heat Turf Classic. Old Pal with a likable effort. This one came back with a 93 buyer speed figure, going 1 1/8 on the Santa Anita turf, and it was an excellent performance. So it looked like one that, knowing how things play out in California, this horse could certainly tackle the open company, lower graded stakes level out there, I would think, based on this effort. Am I overrating Old Pal?
No, I don't think so. Solid Calbred, probably open stakes caliber, maybe not graded stake caliber, maybe not grade 1 caliber, but certainly a horse with some talent and did what he was supposed to do with that field. One of a few chalky results. And unfortunately, there were a few results that weren't so chalky, just to balance things out.
Well, we'll talk about one of them here, though. It took the stewards to get the price horse up. And I do want to talk to you about your opinion on this. DQ. I'm talking with my pocket, potentially with my view. Shea Brennan was my selection in the race, who crossed the line first. Whiskey, Gin, and Brandy ultimately gets put up to the top spot. And I get it. It was a foul around the turn. I just felt like, given the position, given how much ground there was, I don't know. I wasn't fully confident saying that the infraction caused the difference between first and second. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too forgiving. I mean, I'm not like mad about the DQ, but I also wouldn't have been surprised if they had decided to leave this one alone. Am I nuts?
No, definitely not nuts. Ultimately, these judgment calls, it seems like what we're all seeking is some bit of uniformity, and it shouldn't be a matter of us saying, well, that's not usually a DQ in California, but it is in New York, or vice versa. There was definitely contact, and a lot of times it just boils down to that, right? I do think that the danger of saying, well, she was never going by anyway, is that there is some subjectivity that gets introduced to that. And I think you're talking about an exercise that's really supposed to be predicated on objectivity. I would trust our opinions on whether a horse was going to get by. I would trust, certainly plenty of people out there who know what they're doing watching a race, but I don't know how many of those people are in steward stands. And that's the issue. And so, I've noticed it just in my own experience at Sam Houston with different stewards coming in at different times. And there was one steward in particular who came in for a couple of weeks last year, and he allowed way more to take place than the people who had been there previously. So, it's that, and I liked his style. It's just that shouldn't be the case, because if it's a foul in January, it should be a foul in February when the same thing happens. So I think we're all seeking that bit of uniformity, and hopefully, down the line, when we can get some more standardized type of approaches to racing, that could be part of it, because it certainly helps the horse player.
Shocking Gray was another nice price that came in. $19 Shocking Gray paid in the Sunshine Millions filly and mare turf sprint down the hill. Solid buyer speed figure here of 89 for Shocking Gray. What did you think of this one? Any thoughts or horses to take out of it as well?
I don't know how much I take out of it. Obviously, it's all a matter of which Calbreds are going to go where and whatnot. But I think definitely a situation where Stay and Scam seems to be finding ways to lose a little too frequently for my liking. And she was supposed to win this race. She was supposed to handle them on paper. Now, this was a race that became tougher when they redrew it, because, of course, this card was originally supposed to go on January 11th and then was postponed a week because of the wildfire. So her job did get tougher. She was 2-5 on the morning line, I think, first time around, and wasn't quite that short, at least on the morning line this time. So it's a bit of a troubling trend with her, that she seems to find a way to lose these races at short prices a little more often than I'd like to see.
Yeah, really was pretty well handled in the end, going down by 2.25 at even money there. Shocking Gray with the victory. You could accuse me of saving the best for last as we pivot to the Cal Cup sprint. Big City Lights and a 104 buyer speed figure, really stopping the clock in impressive time. And not for the first time in the last few years do we have a Calbred who's running the kind of numbers that you would think could be players in any sprint anywhere in the country. Now, it's a 4-horse field. I get it. It's an easy trip. I get it. The horse is 1-10. I get it. But the figure is the figure, and the figure was good.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing to see this horse come right on the heels of the Chosen Vron. And I shouldn't speak about the Chosen Vron as if he's retired. He's not retired. We might not ever see him again, but still, this feels like Steve Young succeeding Joe Montana, right? It's like one was really good, and then we get one that's still really good. But this horse looked good and handled a field that he was supposed to beat easily, did what you're supposed to do. And, you put him in that scenario. He was part of a 3-race series of very, very short priced horses that followed an 11-1 race 1 winner. And then the second choice won the 5th race and keyed, I think, a $43 pick 5 for 50 cents. So it looked like it was going to be pretty chalky on paper, and it played out that way. But Big City Lights looked good, and you could imagine, I would think he'll be pointed to some open company races, just based on what we've seen in some of the stakes out there. And I don't think we're going to get a lot of the horses that are locally based running there. I think the good ones would be going out of town if that's usually the case.
Yeah, makes sense. let's talk a little bit about Gulfstream. A calm before the storm type of a weekend with the Pegasus coming up, but they did have some of their sunshine races as well, the sprint and the turf. We'll start with Damon's Mound, who I was really surprised. I was on TV for this one, and I said, the betting action to me is notably cold on Damon's Mound. I'm sticking with him, but I'm betting a little bit less. In the end, of course, I wished I'd bet more because he got the job done, but it wasn't exactly completely convincing. Damon's Mound getting it done by a neck, sort of a desperate neck to Comedy Town for Safi Joseph in second. But Bill Mott has a winner with Damon's Mound. I think it's going to be interesting to see where this horse goes from here. Sometimes when they come back off a layoff, new trainer, and they're bet a little bit more tepidly than I was guessing they were going to, sometimes that's a sign that they're actually going to move forward in the next start because maybe they weren't fully fit. What did you make of Damon's Mound?
Yeah, it only got a 90 buyer. It looked better in terms of him really just gamely holding those horses off than you would think in terms of what it did versus the clock. But, I hate doing the whole, it was just a comeback, it was probably a prep, it was this and that, because we don't know. And it's also, Bill Mott, I think, would be the first to admit to you, this is an odd time to bring a horse from a long layoff back because, where exactly are you going? There aren't meaningful sprints until April, really, and on from there. So is this a horse that we could see in the Carter? Is this a horse that Bill Mott probably covets a race like the Churchill Downs ultimately? Probably. Yeah. And I would think that the ownership moving him from Michelle Lovell to Bill Mott is looking to get to those graded stakes again. Michelle did an excellent job with this horse, and Bill Mott got a horse, that needed some time off, but otherwise was a fully formed product. So I thought it was fun to see him fight everybody off. Let's be honest, it was fun to see two Safis lose too. Right. They seemed to be winning relentlessly and they were bet like they were both going to run very well and they lost. So it happens. He is allowed to lose some races periodically. And so, Damon's Mound was an easy horse to root for early in his career and glad to see him get the win.
Multiple graded stakes winner back amongst the winners on Saturday. Sunshine Turf Stakes was taken out by Ninja Star with an 87 buyer speed figure. Any thoughts on this one?
No, solid effort. This was a race moved to the or to the Tapeta that was taken off the turf. I liked Bapio, and he didn't really have a terribly big excuse. Just didn't really fire when he came off the rail. Maybe not the best ride by Edwin Gonzalez, but I don't want to give him too much of an excuse. But no, a pretty solid effort all in all. No big complaints to me from for having backed Bapio. But Ninja Star, a solid customer who put it all together at the right time.
I was maybe a little more forgiving of Bapio just in sort of flow handicapping. Did manage to prove the best of the speeds in a race where the horses that were 5, 6, 7 early ended up 1, 2, 3 on the wire. So I don't want to criticize the ride, but it's just one of those things flow wise. You look at the chart, you think, maybe the horse didn't love the mile and a 16th. I don't think that's the case. I think it was just went inefficiently fast early and would have a chance to change the results should that group of horses reoppose. Though, as you point out, Tapeta as opposed to turf too. So we'll see where that group convenes next. Those Florida
probably. I should say also it's probably a situation where the winner was helped by that race getting transferred to the Tapeta as much as anybody in the race would have been. Right. Now, I suppose you could argue that about victory achieved, but I will say that outside of Marty Drexler, I wouldn't bank on the Woodbine synthetic form translating perfectly to South Florida. And this was a conversation Brian Nadeau and I had when we did a podcast a couple of months ago before the championship meet started. And I said, the all synthetic surfaces are created equal is a fallacy. I mean, it is just not the truth at all. So I'm concerned about taking those horses just as a rule, but would be careful with that moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise to look at it in a little bit more of a nuanced way. The same way that people used to reflexively say, if they're a synth horse, they'll handle turf or vice versa. It's just not true. You know, I mean, even amongst turf horses, different turf courses and their composition, some of them do better than others. It's
I often wonder if it had to do with the fact that just a lot more turf horses were trying synthetics. But I spend a lot of time looking at dirt to synthetic, synthetic to dirt stats in Formulator handicapping Gulfstream, because there are definitely guys that seem to have identified which horses they want to put on the synthetic. And then there are guys that put horses on synthetic because they really don't think they have the ability, and maybe the surface can negate the disadvantage that they have running on dirt.
Yeah, I mean, I get where people come from with it just in terms of dynamics, right? I mean, you'll see late speed proving the most important thing
Right.
on synth and grass more than on dirt. But then again, there's days when the speed holds just fine on the synth too. So it's
Absolutely.
it pays to pay attention, and it's good to have people like Nick that we can pay attention to, so we can ignore some of these things and just read his stuff and watch his videos. I like that idea. We'll save you some of the trouble. That's one of the things we're trying to do here at the In the Money Media Network. Let's talk about Fairgrounds a little bit. Card that lost a little bit of its luster with the Mother Nature not cooperating even one little bit, but a couple of races that we have to stop and talk about. Let's start with Hit Show getting back on the track and into the winner's circle in the Louisiana. Rock solid 98 Beyer speed figure. Give me a general thought, Nick, about the difficulty of making figures on a sloppy racetrack and how being in the kind of weather we had at Fairgrounds just generally changes. I mean, am I correct in saying it makes it more difficult, or is that not right?
Oh yeah, no, it undoubtedly makes it more difficult. The biggest thing that you run into with sloppy surfaces is that you're going to have dramatic track speed changes more often than not, because those tracks are either going to get wetter, get drier, depending on what kind of weather you have going on at the same time. When it's a sunny day or even a cloudy day and it's run over a fast racetrack, you're not getting a lot of variations in the track speed. It's very rare, in fact. Your splits in terms of variant are more likely to be route sprint versus early late, or distance related, more so than just a whole categorical shift where you're moving because the track speed changed. So this was, and the other thing about a card like this is that you have stakes caliber horses that were slated to run on turf that are now running on dirt, which is not their preferred surface. And, Hit Show ran, I think, 30 minutes after Gigante won the Colonel E.R. Bradley, which was an off the turf race. And, Gigante earned a 91 Beyer in his win, and Hit Show got a 98, and there was about almost 7.75 difference time-wise off of a much faster pace. So, did Gigante run well? Is that Hit Show fig too high? My inclination would be to say that Hit Show fig is probably too high. Now, if it was supposed to be a 92 and Randy Moss gave it a 98, is it that big a deal? Probably not. But I think as the waters get deeper and Hit Show runs in races like the Mine Shaft and then the New Orleans Classic, I would like to think that somebody coming down could knock him off.
Another factor, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that's going to make figure making tough on a card like Fairgrounds on Saturday is you're running from day all the way into night. You're getting lights on. It's getting colder. I mean, these things all have to affect the track speed, don't they?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I think so. And, we don't run, obviously I call races at a racetrack that runs at night every week, but we don't run a lot of cards where we end up or start day and night. But I think there's definitely track speed changes. Ironically, at Sam Houston, our track's actually faster at night. And it's a little bit slower during the day when it takes some sun because it's so sandy that it'll get heavy. And so, yeah, that factors in as well. I think we talked about this at length with regards to the Louisiana Derby last year, maybe more so the Risen Star, because I think Sierra Leone ran when it was fully dark out as opposed to some of the races a little bit earlier. So, yeah, it's just the poor Fairgrounds too. I mean, it makes for such a brutal viewing experience when you're watching a race live there at night. It's really difficult. The place is not really configured for night racing. It's sort of configured for, a couple of races here and there. So it's tough to watch at times, but yeah. And in a race like this where they're zigzagging all over the stretch, they're coming from all over the place. It was not easy.
We'll go back to a little bit earlier on the card and talk about the Silver Bullet Day, won by Simply Joking with a pretty rock solid 87 Beyer speed figure. Should this one be on our radar when we're talking about runners for the Kentucky Oaks?
I mean, I guess you're supposed to say why not, right? It was. I think the Oaks group right now is looking awfully formidable. I'm feeling pretty strongly about it. So I would like to think that they'll still, they'll look pretty good. as time goes by. The Cox fillies looked good. This obviously was a nice win for Simply Joking. It's just a silver bullet day, so she's got to move forward. It was also a wire-to-wire win on a wet track. It was just her second start. But at the end of the day, this is a filly that Whit Beckman debuted in a stake race. So she's clearly a horse that he thought had talent. And now that she's put it all together and won a race and looked pretty quick doing it, I'd like to think that we should keep an eye on her.
Let's talk about the Lecomte Stakes. Now, this I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this figure, which was as low as a 77 for Disco Time. Very well-regarded horse. Visually, this was an effort that is going to turn some heads. I mean, you want to talk about a crazy wide trip. One of my first thoughts upon seeing it was, well, there's going to be one that's a lot faster on the sheets than on traditional speed figures that don't take ground loss into effect. What are your overall thoughts on Disco Time's performance and the figure that he earned? How much are you holding that against him?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny pedigree, right? The dam herself was a sprinter and was most effective sprinting. She was actually a multiple stake winner for Mario Saray a few years ago, but the only sibling to race was a starter allowance, mid-level claiming type that was actually very effective going long. So it's an interesting dam side. It is not it's not much of a Juddmonte dam side, right? The second dam is a Jersey bred. So it's a funny pedigree. This is a horse that obviously had shown some talent early on and broke his maiden impressively at Churchill, came back to win a one other than when Brad Cox was winning everything at the end of that fall Churchill meet. So, a horse that you would think would move forward. I wouldn't take a lot against horses like Built and him for the slow time. I think that what you want to focus on is that this race was run on a wet track. It had a very strong pace. And I think that those are the keys to utilize moving forward. The Risen Star has been the strongest Derby prep really year in and year out for the last 4 years in terms of depth. And if this year's Risen Star is similar, then these horses are in trouble. If East Avenue comes back and he's East Avenue, he did get on the work tab last week. So that's good news, updating something we brought up last week. I think Disco Time will probably end up being a bit of he'll be a relic on this year's Derby trail. But up to this point, I wouldn't hold it against him too terribly.
All right, there's your recapping. We're going to take a very quick break if you are listening. If you're watching, you're going to have to click over to our other video where we will be taking a first look at the Pegasus Stakes. We'll be back right after this.